All right, today we're diving into a pretty wild interpretation of history, all based on our source material. We're talking about Nikola Tesla, but probably not the way you've heard his story told before. See, the source paints him as way more than just a brilliant inventor. It casts him as a key figure in a hidden conflict it actually calls the Gnostic War. So what does that even mean? Let's find out. So our story begins, strangely enough, at its tragic end. Picture it, January 7th, 1943. Nikola Tesla, the man who dreamed of powering the entire world for free, dies completely broke and all alone in a hotel room in New York. It's a pretty stark, sad image. But according to our source, what happened right after he died, well, that's the real tragedy. Because literally within hours of his body being found, the FBI shows up and confiscates everything. We're talking decades of research, all his notebooks, his blueprints, the man's entire life's work. And this brings up a huge question that our source really zeroes in on. If the establishment had just written Tesla off as some kind of crazy old scientist, why the massive, top-level rush to get their hands on his papers? And get this, the guy they put in charge of analyzing all of Tesla's work wasn't some low-level bureaucrat. It was Dr. John G. Trump, a renowned physicist from MIT, a top technical aide for military research, and, yep, the uncle of the 45th president, Donald J. Trump. So to sift through Tesla's secrets, the government sent in one of their absolute best and most trusted scientific minds. Now, to really understand why his papers were considered so important, our source argues that you first have to understand Tesla's mind. It wasn't just creative. It was operating on a totally different level. The source calls his method Gnostic, which basically means he was tapping into direct intuitive knowledge, not just fiddling with parts. The source draws this really sharp contrast here. On one side, you've got Thomas Edison, the ultimate materialist. You know, the guy who famously used brute force, thousands and thousands of failed experiments just to find one that worked. But then you have Tesla. The source claims he didn't invent by trial and error at all. He received his inventions. They would appear to him as fully formed holographic visions. He could build, test, and even run entire machines perfectly inside his own head before a single screw was ever turned in the real world. And this quote just perfectly captures his whole way of thinking. Tesla himself didn't believe his brain was the source of his ideas. He saw it as more of an antenna, a receiver that was tuning into what he called a universal core of knowledge. He genuinely believed he was channeling this information, not just making it up. This really unique way of thinking, this receiving of ideas, led him to his ultimate project, the Wardenclyffe Tower. And according to our source, this thing wasn't just some big radio tower. Oh no, it was an attempt to bring back an ancient form of technology that could have changed everything. So, on paper, the Wardenclyffe Tower was all about global wireless communication, sending messages across the ocean. But the source alleges that its true, secret purpose was way more radical. It was designed to be a planetary-scale engine, something that could tap into the Earth's own natural frequency to give free, unlimited, wireless energy to every single person on the globe. Now here's where it gets really interesting. The source argues that the tower's design is practically a blueprint of the Great Pyramid of Giza, which it claims wasn't a tomb, but a massive power plant. Both, it says, were three-part circuits. First, they'd tap into the Earth's natural electrical currents. Then, they'd amplify that energy like crazy, and finally, they'd broadcast it out. It's a really fascinating parallel, you have to admit. But you know, a dream of a fully powered planet with free energy for all? Well, it had a very powerful enemy. Our source calls this interference Archonic suppression, this idea of a force that's actively working to keep humanity limited and under control. And it points to one man in particular as the guy who made sure this technology never, ever saw the light of day. The big turning point, the moment it all fell apart, came down to his funder, the banker J.P. Morgan. See, Morgan invested in Wardenclyffe because he wanted to own a monopoly on radio. But when Tesla told him it could also provide energy that you couldn't put a meter on, that you couldn't sell, Morgan immediately saw the threat. This wasn't a product, it was a revolution that could totally upend an economic system built on selling things. He didn't just pull his funding. Our source says he blacklisted Tesla, making sure he couldn't get money from anyone else, and just choked the project to death. And so, in 1917, the half-finished tower, this monument to a future of incredible abundance, was demolished, torn down for scrap metal, just to pay off Tesla's debts. The physical dream was over. And that brings us right back to where we started, the government seizing his papers after he died. The dream of free energy might have been torn down, but the science behind it? According to the source, that science was just getting started down a much, much darker path. After spending 3 weeks going through all of Tesla's research, Dr. John G. Trump delivered the official verdict. He basically concluded that Tesla's work was nothing more than the philosophical ramblings of an old man and of absolutely no practical value to the U.S. government. Case closed. The papers were declared worthless.
But this is where the source tells us to just stop and think for a second. Use a little bit of logic. If this research was genuinely useless, why on earth would a top-tier military science team be so interested in it, especially in the middle of a world war? The official story it doesn't quite add up, does it?
And here we get the source's final explosive claim. It alleges that Dr. Trump's report was a deliberate cover story, designed to pull Tesla's science out of the public eye. The so-called worthless knowledge didn't just get filed away, it went deep into the world of black projects. The source explicitly claims it became the scientific foundation for secret military programs, like the infamous Philadelphia experiment, which supposedly happened just months after they seized his papers. And to top it all off, his public legacy was then systematically rewritten, turning this incredible visionary into a caricature, just a mad scientist. So this is where we end up. The source material we've gone through today doesn't just see this as a sad story of a failed invention. It frames it as a major battle in a Gnostic war over technology, over energy, and maybe even over consciousness itself. And it leaves us with one last pretty chilling question. If this version of history is even a little bit true, and if Tesla's dream for the future was deliberately suppressed, what other futures have been hidden from us?